installed in perpetuity in Azerbaijan because they are one of us, essentially. That's the story. Well, but with TAPI, the story was much more complicated because during the Bush-Cheney years, essentially, I'm sure you remember that Dick Cheney was basically going to Central Asia or sending a mission practically every month. They were absolutely obsessed with Central Asia, the team Cheney especially. And TAPI was a very important plank in the whole configuration. And they had to include India. The problem is Afghanistan, even in the 2000s, was extremely unstable. So it was no investor was going to, enter into this adventure, TAPI, with especially because according to the trajectory, can you imagine that TAPI would go through Western Afghanistan, would cross Helmand province? Can you believe? Which at the time was an absolute mess, with American troops everywhere, bombings, you name it. And then we'll go through Baluchistan, which at the time was also extremely unstable because the Baluchistan liberation movement was very active at that time. So obviously nothing happened with TAPI. So what was the Cheney administration doing? Trying to block IPI by all means necessary. So the Iranians built the Iranian part of IPI. The Pakistanis said, look, we don't have any money. And the Iranians said, look, we can maybe finance your stretch, and you pay later, whatever. So, but they never finished the PAC stretch of IPI. And then India was out of the picture. So nothing happened to IPI in the end. And this was because of the efforts of Team Cheney. So this is one of the big intertwined soap operas of Pipelineistan. And now, you know what's going to happen? The famous third way. We're not going to have TAPI, probably. It's too complicated, too expensive. IPI, we're going to have probably IP, India, Pakistan. Oh, sorry, Iran, Pakistan, because their relations are much better geopolitically and geoeconomically now. And the Pakistanis are going to finish their own stretch. What we're going to have is probably, I would say this is the possible third way, which depending on what happens with this new government, this could start maybe even next year. Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, China. And guess who's going to build and finance this pipeline? The Chinese.
China.
So they can have gas from Turkmenistan. They already have a Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Xinjiang pipeline, which they built and they bought the gas. And they're going to do probably this.
And Pepe, important point here.
Yes.
China is, of course, a major importer of fossil fuels that it needs for its population.
Yes.
And of course, Turkmenistan has huge gas reserves, whereas Russia's a major exporter. It's about preventing Russia from exporting and preventing China from importing. So I guess what you're also saying is that China has very close relations with Pakistan. And of course, they have the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Are you saying that the idea would be to try to incorporate Afghanistan into that infrastructure that's already built, integrating Pakistan and China?
Absolutely. And I've been writing about this for the past few years, in fact. Every other column that I write about Eurasia, you see a mention of CPEC, because the most important strategic corridor for the Chinese officially in the New Silk Roads, they say they have 6 corridors, and then they have the Maritime Silk Road. Of the 6 inland corridors, for them, the most important strategically is CPEC, because it's the direct connection, from Xinjiang to the Arabian Sea. Of course, it's very complicated because basically, if one day they build a pipeline, it's gonna have to be parallel to the Karakoram Highway, which in itself, it's one of the biggest engineering feats of the modern era. So this is going to be very costly, very complicated, but I'm sure that if the Chinese come to the conclusion that it's necessary to bring the gas arriving in Gwadar to Xinjiang overland, they're going to build this pipeline. But they have so many options now. Like you know, I mentioned already to you guys the pipeline from Turkmenistan. They have the two powers of Siberia, 1 and 2. The new one is going to be ready at the end of this year. And they are thinking already about the third way, which would be Turkmenistan, northern Afghanistan, going all the way to China via the Wakhan corridor, where what are the Chinese doing in the Wakhan corridor? Right now, as we speak, they're starting to build a road from the extreme west of Xinjiang through the Wakhan corridor, going straight into Badakhshan province in China. And why? Because Badakhshan is the holy grail for the mineral wealth of Afghanistan. So you see that all of this is interconnected.
And
So
you mentioned Xinjiang. It's so
yes,
important. If you look at the map here, it goes up
absolutely.
to China's Xinjiang province, which of course anyone watching this, most of our viewers are in the United States or Canada or Western Europe. They
Yes.
know that Xinjiang has been so targeted by Western governments with these claims that China is committing genocide, supposedly. In fact, Pepe, the last time we had you on, we talked about this, the propaganda campaign targeting Xinjiang, but it's not only about destabilizing China, which is the main point, I would say, but it's also in creating this kind of low-level insurgency in Xinjiang that prevents China from being able to govern securely and being able to develop. But it's also about preventing these infrastructure projects by, if you can cut off Xinjiang and destabilize that region, it's really hard for China to integrate economically and politically with the rest of Central Asia because everything is going to go through Xinjiang.
Ben, let me just tack on a question since you brought that up. And Pepe brought up CPEC, the Chinese-Pakistan Economic Cooperation, because there have been attacks.